can see how it's set up, I'm not exactly sure.
I know that's been like calling for, they're all just on one page, you can time it out. We just had a lot of information to say.
So would you sooner have one on a page?
It's like five per. It's like five per page. Yeah.
5 per page?
Like a page scroll.
Instead of 60 per page.
Okay. Open book, open note, you can use Excel, use anything you want except the live person.
So we have to kill them.
So one of the funniest things I have ever seen is there was a young woman that was dating a guy in one of the classes that one of my colleagues was teaching. And it took the guy an hour and 45 minutes to complete the exam. It took her 16 minutes and she took it as soon as he logged off. Yeah. And they missed kind of the same questions. I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of online exams, but I trust your honesty. Okay. Trying to think of anything else. Oh, I think I told you it's 60 questions, it's actually 50 questions. I started to feel like I was repeating questions, and I don't like to do that, so. That's kind of it. Where do you want to start?
Question one.
We'll get which.
Can we go subject by subject and just review?
Sure.
Like, obviously the stuff we did in the beginning may be more rusty.
Yeah, so kind of the first thing we did after the last exam were the tabletop experiments. Why did we do those?
Demonstrate the bullet effect.
That was the beer game,
Was it?
right? The beer game was all about the bullet effect.
So is that last test?
No, it's on this exam as well. Why did we do the tabletop experiments? Yeah. Right? So we talked about this idea of how do we change processes. What were some of the big takeaways from the tabletop experiments? Okay, what do we call that?
Visual cue.
Yeah, use visual. Do we need to change rooms?
They scheduled the room from 7:30 to 9.
240 or 242?
240.
Okay, I got a weird email back and it said something about 240 and 242 and so I'm probably in the wrong room.
Okay, well, and there's people in that room too, but they might have just gone into an empty room to see.
Let me go kick them out.
Okay, sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. I'll
And
be right
I
back.
mean, if you don't want to move everyone, if we can kick them out, we can take the other room too. Like we'll be fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because they're the same size.
Do you have a big group though coming?
We have a word activity, like a family history word activity.
Nice.
So.
Let me see. I'll go talk to them.
Thank you. So sorry to interrupt everyone. What class is this?
Supply chain.
Oh, good. I'm a family history major, so.
Also come.
That's a big change.
I've worked in that
Surprise,
If people die, we record the name, do that.
Well, that's also just the
Hey.
supply chain of humanity. I mean,
Yeah,
reason
so-
means like
Turn
each
cradle to
child
grave,
is
right?
a supplier.
Gotta love
Your customers and stuff.
We got that one.
We should probably just remain rooms because if it's one activity.
I think that's more than three.
Or some put the sign on it.
It's like out of two.
So I tried.
I think it's five.
Do we have paper or tape?
And it has a cool twin.
Yeah, it's like this much.
Yeah.
So
That's
my
a
German
ten,
wife
that's
split it out,
10
no one cut
points.
themselves, and I had to start names.
If I would ask questions.
And then we got another 20 from Jeopardy. We signed
Oh,
Now, how fast
Okay, we're good.
is the internet?
But yeah, that means each question.
Yeah, so tabletop experiments. First time through, what'd we do? What'd we learn about?
You were terrible. Or,
So you get a
Pretty consistent.
new task you're not familiar with, and it changes your variability and everything goes up. There's a learning curve.
So learning curve's important. What's the learning curve say? It takes time for people to adjust to change, right? And what happens when people first are hit with a change? Yeah, you're not very good at it. And in fact, we see a little bit of stress when people, right? And so you get some variability because of that stress. What do people want to do when a new change comes along?
Unchanged.
Unchanged, right? They are the assassins. And then you have the champions. And the champions like, just stick with this. We'll get through it, right? Okay, so what else did we learn? What happens when you totally re-engineer a process and don't give people any training? The cues. Yeah, it messes everything up and usually fails. What happens when you give people these training cues? These visual cues?
Their performance greatly increases.
Yeah. And in fact, in the one we did a baseline the first time. Which one of the 4 phases most closely resembled our baseline?
The visual cue.
Writing it backwards with visual cues. Right. So that's a pretty high performance just by adding those visual cues. Okay, next thing. Yes?
Sloganeering, like you're
Oh
changing.
yeah. What do slogans do for us?
Nothing.
They actually shift blame.
Okay.
Yeah. So if I have a really cool slogan and I'm your manager, and I don't provide you any training, anything that makes your job easier, and I come to you and I say, wow, we had this great thing going and you're just not performing. Right? Who have I shifted blame to?
Me.
Sounds kind of like the military way, doesn't it?
I'm all there is to say.
Actually, the military is all about training.
Overtraining.
Okay, so that's changing processes. It kind of kicked off this whole second block because this whole block are about processes. The next big thing we talked about was why do we forecast? Go ahead.
So that we can know how much to provide to the market.
Yeah. This sets the pace for everything else we do. Right? So why do we forecast? Well, if we didn't, we're guessing. Really, a forecast is kind of a guess anyway, right?
oh, it's no matter what wrong.
Yeah,
Forecast.
every forecast is wrong, right? Every forecast should also have what? Some degree of how much confidence you have in the forecast, and that's a function of your data. Talk to me about different types of forecasting. What are some of the different types of forecasting we're talking about?
Percent of sales.
String method.
Boy, it's been a long time, hasn't it?
The only thing I remember is like the string method.
What's that?
The string method.
Yeah, the string method. What are we doing with the string method?
Put a string on it, see how fast it's growing.
Yeah. What are we trying to really get to with the string method?
You can kind of just keep it going and see how much you're expecting it to grow.
One specific thing we're looking for. It starts with a T. Yeah, trend, right? String method's all about trend. What are some other methods we talked about? Yes?
Real quick, so string method, you just put the string where you have the most information and just find the lines.
So what you do is you throw a bunch of data at the wall, right? You plot it all, and then you ask Excel to plot a line for you through it. And
A regression of the data.
yeah, pretty much what it is. And it shows you this is kind of the way your trend's heading. What else? We actually went through 3 or 4 different forecasting models very quickly.
Did we do something with smoothing?
Yeah, what was that all about?
I can't remember.
Yeah, let me try to simplify things just a little bit. So there's kind of 3 things we talked about. We talked about data, we talked about models, and then we talked about checking our models. And there's a couple of different things that are very important to our forecasts. What do you think they'd be?
Isn't that enough data, so you need like 30 days of data?
Yeah, do we have enough?
Is it relevant?
Is the data relevant, right? What else about the data?
There's variance in it,
Yeah, why would we care about that?
because a high amount of variance means we have an unpredictable forecast, or an inaccurate forecast.
Variance determines how much confidence we're gonna have in this forecast, right? What else? What are specific data points we would want?
High and low.
High and low what? When we talk about forecast, what data specifically are we talking about?
Money, sales, usually.
When we say demand, what do we mean?
What the market wants.
Sales, right? In the past, how much have we sold? Specifically, what are we kind of looking for? What does a forecast give us? What's that number? If you had to just tell me, explain what it is.
So how much we should make?
Yeah, how many we should make because what?
We expect to sell this many.
We expect to sell next period this much, so this is how much we should make for that period. That's all the forecast is, right? So let's talk about different models we talked about. So we have some linear models, and these are really just averages. We have causal models. We'll talk more about these. And then we have some other models we could use that are more qualitative. What do the linear models tell us?
Averages.
Yeah, that's written there, right? So we specifically talked about 3 different types of averages, or 3 different types of kind of linear models. One was a 3-month moving average, or a moving average model. Well, what are those all about? Why do we use a moving average? Yeah.
Because sometimes it's seasonal, I mean, so you depends
Okay.
on time. 3 months, looking at how much you're making over that kind of time.
Yeah, we actually didn't go into it in this class, but generally when you have seasonality in your data, you pull it out before you start doing your forecast. We didn't really talk much about that in this class.
Does
Yeah.
it move as just a way to kind of cope with demand and how demand changes? So you're always taking 2 months of the previous data
Yeah.
and the most recent month, kind of
Yeah, what does taking the most recent do for us?
gives you the closest guess to what next is going to happen.
What do we know about old data?
Not very reliable.
Not reliable usually at all, right? So, interesting kind of precedents here of the car market. Number 1 seller of cars in the U.S. 20 years ago sold something like, had like 35 or 40% of market share. I'm talking about GM. Today, number 1 seller in the American market has about 12 to 15% market share. What happened?
More competitors.
Lots of competition, right? Competition really ramped up. So the market changed dramatically. Would we want to use data from 20 years ago in our forecast? Not at all. So one of the beauties of a 3-month moving average, this linear model, is it uses the most recent data to create the forecast for the next period. So the way this works is if I have lots of data, it just breaks it down into 3-month periods. And my forecast is just going to be the average of these 3 months. That make sense? Why do we call it a moving average? What's moving? Yeah. So when I add my next month's data in here, this becomes my next 3-month average, right? That make sense? Why would we weight a moving average? Yes.
Well, something that's more close to your data, more relevant.
Right on. So we just don't treat every month in those 3 months the same, we weight it a little closer. So that's moving averages. Why do we use these?
More accurate?
They're more accurate. What do they do to variance?
It eliminates more of it.
It reduces some variance, right? They're also easy. And sometimes a simple forecast is a really good forecast. By the way, the simplest forecast you can have is something called a naive forecast. It is the most popular forecast ever used. It basically says, I look at the previous period, that's my forecast. There's problems with naive forecasting, obviously, right? So what is the problem with the naive forecast?
Naive. You might have had a good
You
month.
look dumb when you suggest it.
So, and we'll write this,
So could you say the company that's in your forecast? It's the previous number.
Doesn't wait change.
I'm sorry, that should say actual. That's a naive forecast. So the forecast for the next period is equal to my actual demand for this period. What's wrong with this?
Well, it assumes no change.
Yeah. It also assumes what? No variability, right? With no change variability, same thing. Okay? What if I did this? What did I just do?
Maybe a self-adjusting forecast.
Yeah, it's adjusting for the error I made in the previous forecast. And if I throw this on the front, what's an alpha do for me?
That's your.
It's my weight. Yeah. How much do I worry about the previous, how much I was off? Anyone know what we call this forecast? Yeah, this is exponential smoothing. It's really nice because it's kind of a self-correcting forecast. If we're off big the time before, it adjusts to how far we've been off historically. Over time, what should happen with this particular forecast?
Become accurate.
Yeah, it should self-correct and become more and more accurate over time. So we talked about 3-month moving average, weighted moving average, exponential smoothing. Those are all linear forecasts or naive forecasts. What are these really good for, quite honestly?
Sales.
One more time?
Sales.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry, sales.
So, yeah, projecting what sales are going to be. These are just ways to extrapolate. Ways to take our data and say, what do we think this data is going to do next? What happens in real life? Yeah, our statisticians are dying because we're extrapolating. Right? What else is going on? What happened last week, you think, to Baskin-Robbins sales? Why? It got cold, right? And unless you're the University of Minnesota football coach, you don't eat ice cream a lot when it's snowing. They actually had pictures of him eating ice cream on the sidelines during the football game.
And then the other coach had like a t-shirt on.
Yeah. He's a true
Bill Belichick.
Minnesota, yeah.
The cutout switch.
Cut off that
yeah.
stupid cutoff.
Causal models are what we use then. So
From Massachusetts.
we create these linear models that tell us what we think data is going to be doing. And then we look at other events and we make some hypotheses. So I did tell you guys about the Baskin-Robbins study that a group did. No, really?
You did.
Okay. Again, number one thing that influenced ice cream sales at Baskin-Robbins right down the street, LDS events and BYU events. Weather to some effect, but not as much. So what a causal model tries to do is say, what else is out there that might affect sales? And we do things like linear regression or multiple regression to try to test these hypotheses. So, gas mileage. How much does that affect car sales? The answer is, it depends. Right? Yeah, go ahead.
Do causal models only consider qualitative factors and then use numbers to try to prove those qualitative factors?
You have to go in with hypotheses. So generally, you can mine your data, so you can throw a bunch of data and see what's correlated and then go from there. But generally speaking, yes. You make some guesses. I think when it's cold, Baskin-Robbins sells less ice cream. That's a pretty basic guess, right? But we could find for every temperature degree that it drops, here's your expected drop in ice cream sales. Or the inverse relationship, right? So yeah, there are qualitative factors that fit into causal models. Okay, so what do we do with that? Well, we used our linear model, we found this guess of a number of where we're going to be. Then we need to add on whatever numbers these causal models tell us we're going to increase by because of the relationship between these things. Does that make sense? Or are we totally lost?
So add the causal, outcomes to the linear model.
Yeah, so let's say we did the Baskin-Robbins and it showed us that in November it goes like this, but there is a BYU basketball game against Gonzaga. So we would expect, even though our trend is declining, we would expect a spike in sales on that day. And we could tell exactly how much because of the causal model we've developed. Okay? Okay. Qualitative. What are we talking about here? What are some qualitative methods or some... I actually don't like the word qualitative much. I like the word judgmental. Yeah.
So it's like terrorists use airlines to blow up the World Trade Center, so airline sales are going to go down.
Yeah. After 9/11, what happened to airline stocks?
They disappeared. Companies failed.
Yeah. Other qualitative things that are done real commonly, you get your sales force together, you say how much you think you're going to sell. Right? Yes?
How would that example be different from a causal model?
You could go back and test it as a causal model, but what he's saying is just this intuition that's out there is a qualitative method.
Looking at history.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you had that idea, then you would go use a causal model to test that idea. Okay, so there's some problems with qualitative models. One thing people get mixed up a lot, market research. When marketers go out and do market research, what are they trying to figure out? Do people like this, right? Are they generally trying to put a number next to do people like this? So I've had a lot of people come back and tell me market research is a quantitative type of forecasting. It's not, right? It's answering a much different question, which gives us the intuition of how much we should order.
That's why God made managerial accountants.
What's that?
And that's why God made managerial accountants.
There you go. Okay. Then we get to checking our forecasts. How do we check a forecast?
Reviewing it after the period of the forecast has passed.
Okay, and what are we looking for specifically?
Accuracy in
Okay.
what you're measuring or what you're looking to measure.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. Over time, how well did our forecast perform? So what we're looking at is if this was my actual data, oh gosh, I made it nice and linear. And these are my forecasts. I probably actually have that backward. What are we trying to see?
How off we were.
Yeah, how far off are we? We have three main things we use, something called MSE, MAP, and MAPE. And I group MSE and MAP together because they do the same thing.
Which is,
Let me show you, okay? So let's just make up some numbers here. Gosh, I really got rid of all these ratios. Okay. Here's our actuals. This is our data from 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. Actual demand was 250, 275, 350, 225, and 200. Forecast was 300. 300, 300. So what all these methods do is over here, you have to figure out what's the difference, right? How would we find the difference? Okay.
The sum of the actual minus the expected or the expected.
Yeah. So, real simple way, we look at this number, subtract this number. All right, what's the problem with some of these numbers? We had negatives. So what do we do with negatives? How do we get rid of it? Why don't we want a negative? What are we looking for? Yeah, just how far away are we? We don't care if it's positive or negative. So what are two ways we can get rid of negative numbers? Yeah, use absolute value. And MAD stands for mean, or average, absolute deviation. So we throw absolute values around these, sum them up. There's 150, there's 200. Divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 observations. What is that number? My mind is just showing something. 40? Yep. So our MAD is 40. MSE, and I'm not going to do the math there. What's another way we can get rid of these numbers, these negative numbers? Yeah, we multiply by what? We could do that, but then what would happen to our positive numbers? Say it again? Square it. Square it, yeah. And MSE uses this exact same formula down here, and we'll get a much bigger number because we've squared everything. Okay, so that's MAD.
Won't you take the group at the end in order to?
You could, they never do. Yeah, and the reason why is this is not a normalized number. So in other words, the only way you can use MAD is to compare data within the database against itself. So we could look at forecasts, 5 different types of forecasting within the same data set and compare their MADs or their MSEs.
Isn't that saying in our forecast we were off by an average of 40 units?
Yes.
Whether that was plus or minus.
Yeah, but if we went to a different data set, we have to start having problems. Right, because that 40,
Doesn't include the new data.
yeah. So what do we do? How do we compare data from 2 different data sets?
Main.
Yeah, we use MAPE. What does MAPE do differently than MAD? You want to normalize this data, how can you do it?
Percentages?
Yep, that's what we're doing, we're turning in a percentage. So what would we divide this 40 by?
You divide it by either your actual, or percent of actual, this, like the.
Your average
Actual.
average demand. Yeah. So our average actuals. So you just divide that. What is that going to give us?
The percent error.
Percentage. What does MAPE stand for? Mean
That was totally guessing.
absolute percent error. So there is going to be a very tricky question on the exam. It's going to ask you to compare data from different databases. If it asks you to do that with MAD, no, you can't do it. If it asks you to do it with MAPE, where do you want MAPE to be, high or low? Low, yes. Question here first.
So if you did actual, my assessment over actual, then divide by n, would it be the same thing?
Yes.
Or-
Yep. Yes.
So just to make sure I got it right, do you take the actuals and divide that by the MAD, or other way around?
You take your MAD,
And the, yeah.
and then you
the-
find the average of this.
Yeah,
And you divide the MAD by that average.
okay.
And it gives you, as a percentage, how far are we off? Yes?
If you ask an MSE question, do you want it in the squared or just in?
There will be no MSE questions that are numerical.
Yeah.
Okay? In fact, there are very few numerical questions on this exam. I'm more concerned you understand the intuition. Yeah. Yeah, MSE is the exact same thing as MAD, but you're getting rid of these negative numbers in a different way.
So you're gonna get the same.
You're going to end up with a much bigger number here. Right? Your MSE is going to be huge. So this was 40. I have no idea what the MSE would be.
So, and then.
Yeah. They're numbered that's just relative to that database.
Okay.
So what's MAD is telling you is on average, you're going to be 40 units away. Your forecast is going to be 40 units away from your average demand.
So you would just use this in the same data set as it grows over and over again? Is that the idea? Or-
You could, every time, you have to refigure MAD every time. So the thing that MAD is the very best at is saying, let's say I wanted to test 3 different forecasting models using the exact same data. Right? So if I do a 3-month moving average, here's my actuals I have. I go back to my data set and say, if I were to use the 3-month moving average, what would my MAD be? Compared that to weighted moving average compared to exponential smoothing. And I can even play with the alphas and see what adjusting those alphas would do to my exponential smoothing. Matt, yeah.
So how would you give us how would you give this to us in problem? Like, would you give us a chart like we have?
I would give you six or 7 or 8 things just like this. And have you develop a 3-month moving average forecast, and then ask you what the MAD is.
What you did?
It's really similar to what I just said, but it's not exactly what I just said. Deborah,
Wait, how would we develop a 3-month moving average?
where would it start here?
2009.
2009, then we go 1, 2, 3 months.
So 3 years?
And my 4th month forecast would be the average of these 3. For exponential smoothing, I'd have to start you with a forecast so you could know how far it's off. Yes?
So, comparing MAD and MSE, right, is there a reason why you use one over the other?
Preference, really? People don't like big numbers. I'm not a big fan of MSE because the numbers get really huge. Yeah.
So this problem, the MSC is 1,750. How does that help you at all? Because this says, oh, I'm off by 40 units, so let me adjust my demand 40 units. But now I'm at 1,750. That's beyond.
It's just a number. Like I said, I do not like MSE very well.
We'll go on.
In fact, you're not going to have a lot of questions about it, just know it's there.
Okay.
People just use it to compare 2 forecasts against each other.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people, statisticians love it, I don't know exactly why. And you can probably tell us, but no. Yes?
So, in interpreting MSE, I know it's probably not necessary to know, but like,
If a number is bigger, it's worse.
alright.
In all of these 3 types, how do we check our forecast? A bigger number is bad.
Can you just go over how to do a smoothing, and how to develop a smoothing average?
Exponential smoothing.
With that data there.
So with this data here, let's skip down 1 month. So let's go 2010. Our actual data in 2010 is 275. So our forecast for the next period equal to 275 plus whatever we decide our alpha is, times our actual minus our forecast.
Wait, isn't it actual 275?
Oh, thank you. So this says our forecast for next month should be, we have a negative 25 here, and let's use an alpha of,
30%.
what's that, 30%? 0.3. So we're at like it's 8. So it'd just be 275.
And 7.5.
And this is a negative number, right? So it'd be
67.5.
our forecast would be 268 for the next group. Make sense?
So it's actual minus estimate for anybody else?
Yeah.
So,
And that would kill me.
in that, are you using data from your 2010 forecast?
Yeah. If it makes you feel any better, I don't ever ask you to create a forecast using exponential smoothing.
Okay, so if we don't,
I would know what this equation's all about,
Know like what it means, but I don't know like what double squiggly.
Well, we have to.
what alpha is.
Yeah, I don't
I would know what alpha's all about.
Okay.
Alpha has
When do we use a really small alpha? Yeah, when our forecast has been pretty close. In other words, we don't have a lot of volatility. We know by looking at our data, there's not much variability here. So we can shrink alpha pretty small. When do we use a big alpha?
unsure.
When things are really unsure. And I have no idea why we use so many Greek letters.
Yeah, I don't see anything about it.
You've never seen an alpha?
I'm not a smart man.
got a couple
Jeopardy
questions, right?
Yeah.
We got a lot of Jeopardy questions right now. Okay, any more questions about forecasting? Yes?
One question about the smoothing equation.
Yes.
In the textbook, they give like 2 different forms.
I'll tell you, the textbook uses the most confusing formula for exponential smoothing I've ever seen. And I've talked with Dr. Foster about it. The next edition, of course that's not going to help you guys, but the next edition, I have encouraged him to use this formula because it's a lot more intuitive. Yes?
Sorry, I hate to repeat things, but you said there's a tricky question on the test, and you said we can't use math. What was the question? Like why?
So MAD right now is telling me, on average, I'm 40 units away from the average. Okay, so let's pretend this was pillows. And now I want to do forecast for mattresses.
Oh, you're talking about different data.
And I use 2009, 2010, 2011. I cannot compare forecasts. I cannot say, in my store on average, moving average works better than exponential smoothing. Why? My MAD over here might be 7. Is that better or worse than the 40 on pillows?
You don't know.
There's no way to know. What would let us know? Maybe. Because we've normalized our data and we're looking at percent error. Does that make sense, Taylor?
Yeah, that clears it up.
Okay. Okay, that's forecasting. Other questions?
Next subject. What was extra forecasting?
Inventory.
So do we not need to know the names of the different models?
I would know the difference between moving average, weighted moving average, and exponential smoothing. And I would know the difference between a causal forecast and a linear value forecast. Okay. Inventory, tons of fun, right? Okay, we're going to talk about 3 inventory models now, and 1 inventory model when we get to lean. Okay. Single period model. When do we order? One time. Examples.
Events, weddings, games,
Weddings, football games,
public games.
funerals.
Shouldn't have to.
Yeah. That would be odd. Okay, how much do we order?
A lot. I guess it depends on the thing.
Isn't it the cost underestimate divided by the cost underestimate plus the cost overestimate?
So let's talk about this formula for just a few minutes. And I don't give you any really super hard questions here, but there are some questions, a lot of questions about intuition here. Why do we care about this?
It's on the test.
It's on the test. Well, let's go way back. Normal curve. Right in the middle of that normal curve is the average. Why do we care about that? What do we usually know when we're doing this sort of problem?
What the average?
On average, how much do people buy? Or if you're planning a wedding, on average, how many invitations did my sister send out? Or did my sister-in-law send out? Or did my best friend send out? Okay? So we know we're going to order somewhere around the average. What's going to determine if we order less than average or more than average? Cost to underestimate over the total cost to underestimate and overestimate. So, a few examples here. What is the cost of underestimating wedding invitations? Presents, right? Average value of a present. Okay, so if we underestimate, for the one person we're going to miss by underestimating by one, it's going to cost us $20. What's the cost if we overestimate?
$2 per invitation.
$2 per invitation, is that a fair value? I haven't done wedding invitations in years.
Printing, postage,
Okay.
picture of the ribbon.
Well, let's make this easy on ourselves. We went high-end invitations.
Holy cow.
We spent $5.
For invitation? Wow.
All overseas.
Automatically, just by looking at the numbers right now, what are we going to do? Yeah, why are we going to overestimate? It costs less to overestimate than to underestimate. We're going to get a number here. What's 20 divided by 25? It's 0.8, right? Okay. Where do we know 0.8 is going to fall on this normal curve? How do we know it's going to be on this side?
Because the mean would be 50%.
Yeah, the mean's going to be at 0.5. It's halfway in the curve, right? Halfway through this cumulative probability distribution. So if I have a number that's less than 0.5, what's it tell me? I'm going to underestimate. If I have a number that's 0.5, how much am I going to order? The average.
So Dr. Wood, can you change then the subscripts, because you just did the cost of over, oh wait, no, you didn't. Wait, yeah, didn't you do the cost of, nope, I lied. Yeah.
How much exactly do we want to overestimate? Well, we take this probability distribution, this 0.8 we get, we look at the z-score table and we convert that into a z-score. That tells us what?
How many more you should order?
How far away we are from the mean. So this 0.8 is going to be somewhere over here. We turn that into a z-score, and that might be something like 1.2. And then we multiply that by the standard deviation. Don't worry about all that stuff.
Wait, so you're gonna.
I'm not going to ask you how many you should order. What I'm going to ask you is, should you underestimate or overestimate? Right? I just want, like I said, I'm not that concerned you can crunch the numbers. My experience has been, it takes 10 minutes of going through a textbook or going through something, and you can figure out how to crunch the numbers and plug the numbers in the right places.
So we're not going to remember it after the semester.
You're not.
Anyway, no.
But you are gonna remember this whole idea of overestimating, underestimating. Right? And that's what I want you to just, right there. Okay? Again, why do we underestimate? Why would we ever want to underestimate? It's cheaper than overestimating. On wedding invitations, what's the obvious thing to do? Overestimate, right? Always, right?
When I say really weird relatives, they're just gonna ruin the wedding anyway. So, private beach, you're done.
Give me some ideas of when we would underestimate.
When you lock into a fixed asset or a major project that you can't get out of.
Okay.
So it's like, hey, we need to buy a new building in order to produce, we buy a new building or not, we don't know if we're gonna use it or not.
That's kind of a one-time deal. That what happens if you overestimate? You're stuck with salvage costs that are huge, right? So the cost of the item kind of weighs into this. Okay.
So is it just like how big the item is?
Not necessarily how big, but how costly definitely plays into it. Salvage value plays into it in a huge way. So if you're buying something that's very expensive and has no salvage value, kind of like textbooks, right? Do you want to buy more textbooks or less textbooks? Yeah, and you guys know that, right? You try to avoid buying textbooks at all costs, because you've been stuck with that before.
Pay them first.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I understand this. So if this were like a real case, we get this 0.8, we would do 0.8 minus 0.5 divided by the standard deviation, which would give us like 1.2. We do 1.2 times, if the average is 500 invitations, we do 1.2 times 500. That would give us the real answer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, if that was your standard deviation. So you'd order a lot of invitations. Okay, so how much do we order? It's kind of defined on the cost to overestimate and underestimate. How much extra should we carry in this?
None.
The nice thing about this is this is telling us, generally we're going to carry the average. How much extra do we carry? It's determined by that cost to overestimate or underestimate. A few things I love about this particular thing is just this intuition. I love the fact that you decide up front exactly how much your safety stock is worth. So is it worth it to carry extra safety stock, or is it worth it to go a little leaner and risk running out? Okay, fixed time model. How does this model work?
Just sets a time.
Yeah.
And then triggers order.
Okay.
Every Tuesday.
Yep, so when do we order? It's a set schedule. Who does this? Bakeries do. Professor Grayhead gave you a few examples. This is actually the most used inventory system in the world. Not the best, because the best is the one that fits your program the best, right?
Is it just because it's the easiest one?
There's a lot of reasons people use this over and over. And when we get to fixed quantity model, to do a fixed quantity model, you have to have continuous monitoring. So you have to have an information system in place that is constantly updating your inventory. And for big companies, most of your Fortune 500s are using EOQ type models. For your mom and pop and mid-sized businesses, most of them are using this type of model.
You have a vanilla version of SAP is like $20 million.
Yeah. So basically, you wander around, you look at your inventory, you decide how much you're going to order. So how much do we order? So here's our timeline. Generally speaking, what you do in this is you say we're going to hold 30 days of inventory. Well, let me adjust that a little bit. You set the days based on what service level you want, so how often you want to be out. Which sounds a little funny because most people say we want 100% service level. Why don't we necessarily want 100% service level? Yeah, it costs way too much, right? So we've ordered here, and we're at 30 days, and this is a 28-day cycle, so it's a lunar calendar. By the way, I had no idea why we had 12 months when we could have 13 months that are 28 days long. drives me nuts.
Ancient.
So we start burning through inventory, we get here, we get to our reorder point, it takes 5 days for us to get our inventory. And we get here, and we want to order up to 30 days. When we get here to the reorder point, we actually have 14 days in stock. How many days of inventory do we want to order?
Back up to
16.
We have 14 in stock, we want to order 16 plus,
That's your
plus 5 days. Why? It's going to take us 5 days to get there. We're totally ignoring safety stock, right? We're going to assume there's safety stock here. I will save that until you guys take logistics, because it gets a little complex.
So the idea is you order back up to your standard operating quantity
Right.
plus safety stock.
So this is what you need to concern about, talk about in this class, right?
So what's
How-
the 5 days?
Yeah, what is 5 days is transit.
Yeah, but then isn't that considered safety stock as far as time to get product versus?
That's lead time stock, or something called the Mandarin lead time. Safety stock is based on a statistical calculation of, if we want to have a 95% service level, here's how much extra we have to hold to make sure 95% of the time we always have inventory in stock.
Where did you get the 14?
I just threw that out.
Oh, okay, so that's just something you have.
Yeah, you got here, and when you got to the reorder point, at the 28-day period, you actually had 14 days in stock.
Okay.
So how much do we order? Well, in this case, we'd order 19 days. What does that mean? What do we have to multiply that by to get an amount?
The average sold.
Yeah, something called daily demand. And that will give us how much we need to order. Okay? We good with this model? Yeah, Taylor.
So will the 14 keep changing then?
Yeah, every time.
Okay.
You might get there one time and you have 0 days, right? You might get there one time and you have 29 days. It changes every single time. That's one important thing to consider in this. What happens to our order quantity every single time in this model?
Changes.
So the timing is staying the same, the order quantity is changing every time. Okay?
Wait, sorry, was it daily sales or daily demand?
Daily demand, average daily demand. Yeah. Okay, fixed quantity model. Am I okay to erase this? Okay, so the fixed quantity model, otherwise known as EOQ. EOQ, which stands for
Economic order quantity.
economic order quantity. What is economic about EOQ?
Calculates the ideal amount of orders.
Trading off total cost, this is the ideal amount to order. What are the two big costs in EOQ that we trade off? Holding cost, setup costs, right?
Is it setup costs or order costs?
Setup and order are the same thing.
Factory store, retailer, production.
So if you are in a factory, the setup cost is the cost to set up for the next batch.
Good retailers.
If you're a retailer, it's an order cost.
So holding is.
It's the cost to place one order or the cost to do one setup. Holding cost is the cost to hold one unit. Okay, so let's draw our sawtooth diagram. So let's skip when do you order first, and let's talk about how much do we order. How much do we order? This amount that trades off and gives us the lowest cost, and actually when you do the math, it creates the point where order costs and holding costs are very close to each other. Okay, so this is our queue, and we're receiving a queue how frequently? And we don't really know, right? But we're receiving the same quantity each time. There's a lot of simplifying assumptions that make EOQ work. So one simplifying assumption is
Demand stays the same.
demand is known and constant, stays the same all the time. So our daily demand is always the same. Another assumption, transportation is known and constant.
Constant change.
The cost never changes, right? So there's no fluctuation in cost. We have unlimited capital. Wouldn't that be nice? So if we're ordering the exact same amount every time and demand is constant every time, where should our reorder point be? Where are we going to put R?
Shouldn't be at the time it takes to place one and
Yeah.
get switched off.
Right on. So from the time it takes us to place an order till it arrives, that's our reorder point. So what an EOQ system does is let's pretend it takes 5 days, and our daily demand is 5. What's the system going to do when I hit 25? 25 units in stock?
Send you an email or text you.
It's going to kick out an order. Most big companies, this is all electronic, they never see it. Right? The system's kicking out orders, stuff's arriving. So we hit here, we get an order, what happens at this point right here? We've run out and
Truck shows up.
truck shows up miraculously, right? Never out of material. Wonderful thing. There's a cool thing about this particular system that we talked about before. What's my average amount of inventory I'm going to have in stock? Half of my queue. And again, because half of the time I have more, half of the time I have less. So my average inventory is Q divided by 2, plus what? Plus 50 cents. This is the first time I've given anyone a test with inventory on it and have not asked you to figure out EOQ for me. And again, because it's a notebook test, I just figured all of you could plug all that stuff into Excel and get a good answer. Right? And if you're really smart, what you would do is go to the textbook and find one that's been solved and make sure you're getting the same answer as the textbook and then plug your numbers in. But I don't have an EOQ question on there for you to... I do have a lot of questions about reorder points and about Q and about what happens when you reduce the setup time, what happens when you reduce holding costs relative to setup costs, what's going on with your order quantities. So, think about that a little bit. Question or big stretch? Any questions about EOQ? Yeah.
What does go
That's a good question, isn't it? Let's play with this a little bit. What happens when we reduce setup costs to 0? Well, let's go not 0, let's go really, really small number close to 0. So it's practically free to set up.
Order small batches, but frequently.
Yeah, because relative to ordering, holding is now really expensive. So what do?
We don't hold anything.
We don't hold anything, we order all the time. What do we call that?
Just in time.
Just in time. What happens if it's really, really expensive to order and not as expensive to hold? We are going to store stuff like crazy. So our batch size, our order size is going to be very big. So when this gets small, our order size gets small. When this gets big, our order size gets big. Does that make sense?
So is that, for example, like when companies order boatloads or like a shipping container full of stuff because they have to get it from Italy and it takes 6 weeks to get here, so they just bring it
So
over.
some companies are not real smart about that, quite honestly. IKEA drives me nuts. IKEA believes in building lots and lots of warehouses and buying stuff to get a purchase discount. And they don't pay any attention to the other costs involved. I kind of think warehousing is free. Yeah, we should probably talk about that, right? So this holding cost is actually two costs multiplied by each other. One called inventory carrying cost, which is a percentage, and this other that's unit price. What is this? Where does this come from, this inventory carrying cost? Yeah.
Like cost to maintain the building, cost to pay people to watch it.
Yeah, how much does it actually cost to handle the goods? Put them on a shelf, all that stuff. What other costs are there?
Oh, your overheads, adjustments.
Overhead for sure. What's that? Yeah, opportunity cost is actually the biggest cost, right? I have money tied up in inventory I can't put into the stock market and play around with. Other costs? When they opened up the Walmart distribution center in Hurricane, Utah, they opened it before they had all the security measures in place. 18% shrink.
Nice.
Which means 18% of their warehouse was walking out the door.
Merry Christmas. Something.
It didn't take long for them to clean that up. So shrinks in here as well. Obsolescence. All that falls into the inventory carrying cost. What would not be an inventory carrying cost? Do you feel like I'm feeding you a test question?
Thank you.
Production would be in here. Why?
So it would not.
Would not. The warehouse didn't pay for production. Warehouse didn't pay for the transportation. So it's inventory carrying costs is how much does it cost that warehouse to hold that good? Okay. So in the fixed quantity model, when do we order? When we reach the reorder point. How much do we order? The economic order quantity. How much extra do we carry? Just no safety stock's there. It's there all year. We hate safety stock. Okay, we're not quite there yet, but JIT, when do you order in JIT?
As soon as customer orders.
Quickly, right? This is where we use Kanban. How much do we order? Ideally, one. Yeah. How much extra do we order? One of the key targets for JIT is safety stock. We want to get rid of as much safety stock as we can. Any questions? That's inventory. Very quickly. All right, you want to hear the hardest question on the exam?
Yes.
Yes.
What is your name? No. What is the difference between TQM and lean?
One's Japanese, one's the American one.
That's TQM and Six Sigma, okay? Let's think about this. What is TQM? Okay, and what does it try to do?
Get rid of all waste.
No, doesn't get rid of waste.
It's always improving the cost of change.
Yeah. So TQM is about continuous improvement. How do we do that?
Plan.
Roll out.
Plan. I forget, like plan, do, follow.
Plan, do, study, act. Good. If we're in the United States and we're doing Six Sigma, what's the equivalent?
Black belt.
And
As long
DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control. So TQM is all about continuous improvement. We have this cycle that we do where we plan, do, study, act. What are some tools we have in TQM? We have tools that do what?
Find the problem.
Yep.
Organize the data.
Tools that find root cause. Give me some examples.
Fishbone.
Fishbone diagram, Ishikawa, it's the Japanese name.
Do we need to know Japanese for this time?
There will be some Japanese on the exam, yes. Now, some words I think you should know.
Characters or?
Yes.
Kaizen. Sounds like big robots and they fought the monsters. Oh, okay.
it's kaiju.
Sorry. They should just use a sword from the start. There we
Yeah,
go.
I know.
Yeah.
And a very useful weapon, yeah.
Yeah, we should just get it.
All right, let's define these real quickly. Haijunka. Haijunka is production leveling, which means you're trying to get that nice even flow through production. Kaizen, change for good, right? Pokio,
Like it's the correction.
Idiot free.
idiot proofing, right? Kanban,
The cards that signal window order or range.
it's a card. Chidoka, that's man and machine.
Say again?
Man and machine.
Meaning?
We separate machine work from man work, and we use machines to enhance what man does instead of,
Use man's creativity and let the machine do what
Right.
it does.
yeah.
Can you say the first one more time?
Pardon?
The first word there? Yeah.
Haijunka.
What is that?
It means production leveling. So just trying to get your machines running pretty constantly all the time. Okay? So if this is about continuous improvement, we have fishbone diagrams, the 5 whys. Is that all we talked about? No. We talked about flow charting. Okay, what other tools do we have? And what are these really trying to do for us? Find root causes, right? And we have tools for what? Yeah. I'm going to put tools for controlling processes. Some examples. SPC, there's two different types of SPC charts we talked about. P chart, we use a P chart for what?
Drug testing.
Yeah, actually drug testing is a good example. Right? Because what happens when you go in for a drug test?
Peanut cup.
I've never done that.
You will.
You will.
Actually, just 2 points today.
So I'm not that worried about the process because let's worry about the outcomes. Why would p-test be a good example of a p-chart? That's a probability. So it's either you succeed or you fail. So light switches. If you flip a light switch and it doesn't go on, it failed. M&Ms.
It's a color thing, right?
Yeah, it's either that color or it's not. Right? So it's a binary decision there.
So is that the one that's like stay within your limits of your...
Yeah. So on any on any SPC chart, you're going to have a few lines, an upper control limit, a lower control limit, and then usually you have a specification. And then you have an average.
Is this for an X chart?
So a P chart and an X chart are going to look exactly the same. What's the difference?
Isn't it like the football analogy? If you get it in, then it rings. If you get it like any word inside of it, it's okay.
Yeah, that's for this, right? We'll talk about that in just a second. When do we use the X bar chart? When do we use the P chart?
Oh, it's the... factor thing.
X bar charts for continuous variables.
There you go.
Weight, height, anything that can go to infinity with inside itself. P chart is a yes or no. Okay? So let's get to the Philbill analogy we were just talking about. We have a specified area we want to be. So we want 98% of light switches to be defect-free. That's our specs. If on average 96% are defect-free, is that pretty good? Yeah, that's not bad, right? What's the problem? If this was our SPC chart, and this was really our average, what would be the problem here? We're not meeting our specs. And that becomes a problem, right? So what do we want to do? Well, we want to shift that to meet our specs. What if that's the average, but this is our data? What's the problem with our control chart now? Yeah, we broke control. We broke that upper control limit.
Wait, wouldn't that mean it was like 100%?
Yeah. Is that a problem?
I guess so.
Probably not. Unless we spent a ton of money that one day and a lot of extra time to get there. Right? That's the only way that could really be a problem in this case. Other times that could be a real problem. So we looked at defects this time. What if we looked at colors? So we want, we have a mix of 4 colors in our cars. this is for white, and our specs is that we want 40% of our cars to be white.
I see.
And in this case, we made 46% white, one time, right? That kind of messes up the entire system. So a few things, what are the few things we want to attack on an SPC chart? Well, this right here, are we hitting that field goal dead center every time? How close are we to our specs? As much as possible, we want to be right on. How much variance do we have within the system? We want to reduce that variance as small as possible. And if we ever break control on either side, what does that tell us we should do? Yeah, investigate what happened, right? It's a call to investigation. Okay, so that's an SPC chart.
Can you explain again real quick when you're trying to bring the average to match this spec?
Yeah, so let's say that on average, 40% are supposed to be white cars. Using this data here, we came in and our actual percentage was 42. So we're making more white cars than we're supposed to be. What does that tell us? Yeah, we're not hitting our target, right? So what do we need to do? Yeah, somehow figure out what's going wrong with this process that we're making too many. So, I'll give you a really bad example real quickly. Creamery on 9th. Right? Supposed to take 8 minutes to get a burger. What's the problem with Creamery on 9th? Supposed to take 8 minutes, what's it really taking? It's taking 11 minutes. So we know we want to shift this down. So we want to improve our timing of the process. The other problem there, right, their variation is huge. So we know we want to shrink variation down as well.
And that will show.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really the only, I don't think we talked about much more about controlling processing. By the way, regardless of what major you're in, I would highly recommend taking a TQM class. Mainly because it gives you lots of tools you can use, and regardless of what your curriculum is. Okay. I'm trying to think what else we did in TQM. That seems like that's about it. Am I lying?
What I have on my notes is generating ideas, organizing data, and identifying problems.
Okay. So this would be identifying problems. Generating ideas is just brainstorming. Quality actually has very formal roles for brainstorming. Again, this is where I want to help you differentiate the difference between TQM and Lean. TQM is really all about continuously improving. Lean is a production system. It's also included in Lean is TQM. So Lean, it constantly tries to improve. That's what Kaizen's all about, right? It's this constant need to improve. But Lean is really about how do we produce in a way that creates more value to the customer. All right, so talk to me about Lean. What do you want to hear about? Seems like I'm putting all to sleep, but I won't do that. Yes?
Don't they kind of talk about like 7 points of what you've just read? Like,
7 types of,
I don't know.
I forgot a Japanese word.
Muda.
Muda. What are the 8 types of muda? By the way, I wouldn't expect like a question that says, list which of the following are not mudas, which are, mainly because it's so muh, right? Which means you get to that Lean part, That would be an easy question. Right? What would be a hard question to ask the same thing is something like, so-and-so just picked up a defective part from one part of the factory and walked it back to another part of the factory because it was defective.
2 types of waste.
What are the mudas involved?
Waste of movement, waste of defect.
Overproduction, time, transportation, inventory, processing.
Motion, definitely, right?
And defects.
And the waste of people. People's innovation. They should be doing something better than carrying parts around. Right? So there's 3 mudas involved there. Those would be the types of questions I would expect there.
So what are the 8?
So mudas means types of waste.
Yeah. What are the 8 mudas?
There's a slide.
Yeah.
Did you notice on that slide what it spells on the left-hand side? Downtime, right? Okay. So, one of the primary goals of Lean is to get rid of waste. By the way, in Lean, what is inventory?
Waste.
It's waste. In accounting systems, what is inventory? It's an asset. Right? So there is some conflict with kind of the American way of thinking with inventory. How do they try to get rid of this waste we call inventory?
Sell it.
Just in time.
What do we call that? JIT and pull. They use pull systems instead of push systems, which means you wait until you get that customer order before you start producing, and you pull it through the supply chain very quickly. That way you can customize it. It reduces any waste of making the wrong product or making a product unappealing to the customer. It also allows you not to over-process. Okay? So that's where JIT fits. What happens when we reduce in JIT, when we reduce the flow of the river?
You identify problems.
Problems come out. Inventory hides problems.
What's your river example?
Yeah. So if you have a ton of safety stock,